Hey everybody, welcome to another video within the Digital Pros No Code Academy, and this one has certainly been a community request on how to implement Supabase infinite scrolling within inside your FlutterFlow application. So without further ado, let's get into the video and let's get cracking. Okay, so here's a quick demo then of what we are going to construct in this particular sort of series. Now, what you can see on the screen at the moment is probably something that looks really quite simple, but if you just put your mind in your own application on the use cases of implementing infinite scroll, you can see that the benefits will certainly be there. So for example, it could be that you have quite a reasonable size data set that you wish your users to scroll through, but you don't want to load all of that data in advance. You want to do it kind of piecemeal. Now, this won't provide you anything visually that looks like that is going on, but certainly it is happening behind under the covers here. So here is a container. We have a list view. I have some data. I have 100 records in this particular example. And of course, as I'm sort of scrolling up, it just looks like any other particular list view that you have that would have 100 records. But what is actually happening behind the scenes is we are fetching those records 10 at a time as we are going through. So that is what we're going to kind of construct together in this particular video. So let's now move into the project, the starter project, and then we can go from there. Okay, so if you'd like to follow along in this particular video, then please do check the link in the description because it contains a link to this particular starter project, which is what we're going to use to kind of build out this particular example. Let's have a quick walk through this just so you are orientated with the project. It's a pretty vanilla FlutterFlow project. Yes, there's a little bit of styling. There's some widgets already on the page, but we're going to kind of put the essential ingredients into this particular application. But just some bits to note, of course, on the settings, what I've done is I've just gone down to Supabase here. I've just integrated this into my Supabase project. So you can see I've got the API URL there and I've got my anonymous key already kind of loaded. And I've just brought down my particular tables that I'm interested in here. Here you can see I've got a contacts and regions table. I'll show you what that looks like in Supabase if I just flick over to that now. Here we are in Supabase, just a contacts table and a region table. I'm not really too worried about the region table, but I've got the contacts table here. And you can see here, there's nothing special going on. It's just a really, really straightforward set of data. And there's 100 rows in this particular example. So, and with that being said, there's nothing more that I need to demonstrate here. We're going to now move into the next section now where we're going to start building out this particular example. Okay, so here we go then. So the first ingredient that we need in this particular project is we need a fixed height container. Now that's going to be really important to us because as we are scrolling in the infinite scroll, by having a fixed height container, the list view can work out kind of when to make that request to retrieve the next set of records. Now, of course, if there is an infinite height, then when you are scrolling a list view, you're never going to kind of allow the list view to kind of catch up with itself and then know when to make that particular request. So you need to make sure that you've got a fixed height container whenever you are introducing a infinite kind of scrolling feature in your application. So here we are then on the contacts column here, nothing special here. Let's hit the plus, let's add a container in there. And I'm just going to kind of give this maybe a width here. In fact, I'm telling you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to give it no width whatsoever because we're going to let the children determine the actual width that we're going to apply. But I'm just going to put a height here of 210 like that. Now, of course, it's got nothing in there at all. What I want to do is to make this look a little bit more pleasing. I'm going to kind of give it a border radius of say 12, just to kind of give it some kind of curved edges. So now that we've got that container, we can now create a list view. So hit the plus. Let's just do a search for list view here. And there it is. There is our list view. And of course, our list view is going to be important now because that is what's going to take receipt of our database query. And we're going to have all of our contacts loaded within here. So with our list view selected on the left-hand side, let's now apply some item space. And so of course, we're going to be putting some child widgets in here. We're going to kind of want to space those out. And if you've been watching a lot of my content now, I always talk about making sure that we implement spacing as in part of your list views or your columns or your rows. Always try to apply the spacing there. So every item that's going to be in there is going to have a spacing of 12 pixels. I'm going to kind of set the start spacing to 12 and the end spacing is 12. And of course, I could just simply click this little button here. And of course, it will apply 12 all around. So that is cool. Now, what we need to do with inside our list view, the first thing we're going to do is put a row in here. So a row is what we're going to kind of have as our child widget that we're going to repeat. And then inside a row, let's create some text widgets in there as well. So now I've got those kind of set up. With my row, I'm going to kind of just push the kind of the text to either side of the actual row itself. So with the row selected, I can just select this little option here, which will space between and push everything out left and right. So with the row selected, let's now just bring it in slightly there from the left and from the right. So I'm just going to give that 12 there. What's nice about that is because the list view is going to kind of be scrollable, then the scrolling on certainly on a web page is going to kind of be there more on the sort of tucked on the right hand side. I think that is fine. So I'm going to quickly just go through and rename these widgets now because I like to keep all of my named widgets in place. I'm going to do that now. Okay, so my widgets have all now been renamed to just how I want it. I'm just going to quickly give this a little bit of visual styling. So I'm just going to make sure that my text there is just got something maybe just a bit more sort of semi-bold there for that one there. And this one I'm just going to provide a little bit more of a lighter touch there to the font. That just kind of gives it that kind of that separation between left and right. So now I've got all of that in place. The next stage is for us to now implement our API call. So let's now move over to that section now. Okay, so we're now in Supabase because there's a little bit of important detail that we need to get from our project, and this is the project URL. We're going to need to use this in order to set up our API requests because we're not going to go via the traditional sort of integrated features of inside of FlutterFlow to pull in data into our application. We're going to call out using an API call because it gives us the kind of the ability to pull in the level of records that we need based on some query string parameters, and I'll talk a little bit more about those query string parameters very shortly. But you can see I've got my project URL here. I'm just going to copy that, and you can see I just went down to my cog down here, moved over to the API section, and you can see now that that's where I've got that available. So let's now flick back over to FlutterFlow. Let's move into the API calls here. I'm going to click Add, and I'm just going to create a very simple API call to start off with. I'm just going to call this one Contacts List like that, and I'm just going to paste what I've had in the clipboard into that particular section. Now I'll come into just a moment how we're going to sort of extend that particular URL, but we need to create some variables now. So we need to create 3 variables in this particular project. If I go to variables and I'll explain to you what they are. The first one is going to be offset. Now this is going to be of type integer. I'm just going to also create another one here called limit, and I'll explain in just a moment what we are going to use these for. So the limit is we're going to make this request into Supabase, and we're going to say just return me back 10 records or 20 records at every time I make that request. But the offset is really important because the offset is going to kind of be the position of where we're going to then start to get that next set of records. So of course if I pass in something like say a limit of 10, we're going to get 10 records back, but my offset is going to be say 10 itself, then we're going to get the next 10 of records. So you can do 20, 30 on the offset, and we're always going to be getting that next set of records until we basically have none that is available to us. So there is some changes that we can make inside our application to calculate those next set of records, and I'll talk to you about that in a second. But basically what we're going to do is as we scroll through our list, it's going to get to a point where it's going to say, right, I brought back my 10 set of records. Now I need to go and get my next set of 10. So our offset is going to be 10, 20, 30, and then of course the limit will always be 10 because we're going to bring in 10 records every single time. Hopefully I've kind of explained that pretty well that you understand, but you'll see that play out very, very shortly. Now the next variable we need to add in here is our API key. That's going to be quite important. So that's going to be of type string. I'm going to pass that every time we make a request. Now once we've got those, we need to now go back to our headers, and we're going to add a brand new header because of course every time we make that request into Supabase, we need to pass in our API key. So that I'm going to set with a colon, I'm going to do a square bracket there, and I'm just going to type in API key. Now that is matching up this bit in here. Depending on how long you've been using FlutterFlow, of course, this bit means that it's going to match up to that particular variable there. So make sure the case of that is the same. So we're going to pass in our API key. That's a header we're going to pass across. And of course, the API key we obtain from our project here. So we just copy this value here, and that is an app state variable within inside our project, but I'll touch on that very, very shortly. Okay, so now we've got all of this in place. We now need to start adding some query parameters to our URL. That URL that we got there, the API URL, is not good enough. We need to extend it. So with our Supabase project, we are going to have the option to use the REST interface for our Supabase project. So all we need to do is type in REST here, and then /, and we say v1, and then all we need to do is then put in our our table name, which is a contacts. Now what we now need to do is we now need to add our two parameters onto the end of this URL, and due to the convenience of FlutterFlow, of course, we can do this using this query parameters option here. So just select that. We can now add in our query parameters. So just as we had before, I'm going to do offset. Now this is going to be from a variable. Now that variable is going to come from the variables that we've got up here. So I'm just going to choose the offset option. I'm going to do the same thing here for the limit as well. So just with the limit, just choose from variable and then choose the limit. Now, the great thing about doing this here is that when kind of our application runs, then these query parameters are automatically going to be added to our API URL. Now, the old school way of doing this is do a question mark, and then you can say limit, for example, equals, and then sort of square bracket, and then just say limit like that. And of course, our variables that we would have here would then be applied here without us needing to do this. But of course, the convenience of FlutterFlow allows us to do it like this. So we can just take that off and then use everything that this is providing to us at runtime in order to add those kind of query parameters onto our URL. So now that is all in place, let's add to the call itself. Now that's great. How do we now test this? Well, quite simply, we just go to response and test here. Let's see if we get a result back. So I need to pop back over to Supabase and grab our API key from our project. So I'm just going to go here and just copy that. Now we are going to store that in an app state variable very shortly, but I'm just going to paste that in there like that. I'm going to set my offset to be, say, 0, and I'm going to bring back the first 10 records. Now if I just sort of, well, in fact, you can just see here actually my URL is being kind of sort of added to here where the offset is 0 and the limit equals 10. So I just test the API call, then you should see I get my result back 1, 2, all the way down here to then ID 10. So I've got 10 records come back at that particular time. Now if I set my offset to now be 10, you would expect the very first ID to start with 11. Just hit the test API call. There we go, 11 all the way down, of course, to 20, and so forth. And that's kind of how our application is going to work as we start using the infinite scroll. We're going to keep building up the offset to be 10, 20, 30, 40. And of course, we're going to keep bringing back all of those records until no more records are provided, which means then our ListView scroll would then stop at that particular point. So that's great. We've tested everything like that. I don't think there's anything more we need to do here. So just hit save for good measure. And we are now ready to move on to the next bit. So you may already have this in your project, but I need to add the API key into our app state variable. So here on the left-hand side, I've just selected the app values, got app state. Let's add the app state value in. So I'm just going to call this API key like that. It's going to be a string. In my case, it's going to be persisted in my application, hit create. And now I'm just going to paste my API key of my project into the designated value here. So that's now available to us now to then when we make the API call inside our project, we can keep passing this API key in. So that's all there. That's fine. Let's move back over to the widget tree and let's now work on the actual database query now that we're going to run with inside our ListView. Let's go and do that now. Okay, so before we get on to the configuration part of the database query, there is a page state variable that I want to set on my page. And that is going to be for us to control the limit. So this allows us to set kind of hard coded to some respect. It's going to be 10 records that we're going to retrieve back every single time. Now this needs a little bit of thought depending on your own use case for inside your application. You can see here on my screen, my container is not particularly high there. So you'll find that 10 records that was going to be loaded with inside a scroll view will then kind of drop off to the bottom part of the actual screen here. Now, as I start scrolling, I'm going to be attempting to reveal more records so I can then go and get the next 10. Now, in your application, if, for example, your container is much higher than that, then it might be that you need to set the limit that we're going to have to, say, 20 records or 30 records before it then retrieves the next set. So again, tailor that to how you would like. But we're going to need to create a page state variable because we're going to be using that not only to sort of tell the application to retrieve the first 10 records, but we're going to be using that in a code expression to kind of calculate for the next set. So we'll come on to that very shortly, but let's now set that page state variable. Let's just go up here, choose add field here, and let's just type in here limit. It's going to be of type integer like that. It's not going to be nullable, and the initial field value is going to be 10 in my case. It could be different, as I said, for yourself. Just hit confirm. Now that's in place, we can now move over to now sort of setting up the actual contacts list view kind of database query. Excuse the interruption in your learning, but I just wanted to reach out to you to let you know about the Digital Pros No Code Academy. This particular private community is fantastic. It's got all of my training content there, lots of written articles, question and answers, a code library, lots of topics around the no code space, and a fantastic community. Please do check the link in the description. It'd be great to have you part of the community. Okay, so up the top right then, let's choose then the backend query option, choose add query. The query type is going to be our API call, and our grouping call name is going to be contacts list. Is the only one we got there, obviously. Now we've got these options here, enable infinite scroll, so we can toggle that one on, and we can also enable the pull to refresh. I'll touch on that a little bit briefly later. Let's now set our variables up. This is quite straightforward on the first view here. So with our API key, we can set that, choose our value. Now that's going to come from our app state variable we selected or we created earlier. Choose API key, just close that one there. Choose the next one. Now this is going to be then our limit because we set that as a page state variable. So that's going to be kind of initially 10 in my case there. Let's just minimize that. Now let's set our next one. This is going to be the offset. This is a little bit more interesting now. So we need to kind of create a code expression that's going to kind of calculate this particular value. Now you can see within inside the palette here, we've kind of got the options here of next page index. So for us toggling on the infinite sort of scrolling ability within inside the list view, you can see now that it's kind of providing us some additional values that we can sort of use within inside our application. We've got this next page index. So what's going to happen is that initially when our view sort of loads up, our list view loads up, our next page index is going to be 0. And as I start scrolling down, that index value is going to increase to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I can use that to my advantage because if it's, say, for example, 2, then I can do 2 times the limit, which is then going to be 20. So I get 20, come back, the next page index will then be 3, then I do 3 times 10, and that will be 30. So of course you can see now what I'm doing is I'm now setting my offset to say give me the 20, 30, sort of 40, kind of in increments of 10 from my API endpoint. I can get those results back. So that's how this is going to work. So I'm just going to now create a code expression, and I'll show you how I kind of calculate that. So if I choose a code expression, I'm going to add in an argument first. Now this is going to be now our limit. Now I'm going to set this now to be integer. Now of course the value is going to come from our page state variable. So just to page state and choose limit. So we've got that available. I'm just going to minimize that there. Choose our add argument, and I'm just going to set this one. I'm going to call this one next page index like that. And I'm going to choose the type here. It's going to be an integer. Now that value is going to come from this next page index. So just select that. Now I'm just going to minimize that there. Now we need to create our expression. Now this is really, really straightforward because all we need to do is say next page index times the limit like that. Now that's going to obviously then return back the calculated result. So I just need to choose check errors here. That's going to go away. Think about it. I've got no errors, and you can see now that that is now all nicely set up. So just hit confirm. And that's going to calculate that, of course, as we start scrolling this particular list view. Now, there's a few little caveats to this. I don't think it works particularly brilliantly on the first request, and I'll kind of demonstrate that a little bit later. But at least it's going to return me back the first set of records. And of course, it means that as I then start scrolling, it's then going to kind of continually then bring back the rest of the records. But I'll show you a slight little quirk with it, although it's not a biggie at all. It's not an issue, but it just means you're going to kind of get that initial request is going to kind of almost bring back sort of your first 10 and your 20 records instantly, but I'll demonstrate that a little bit later in the web browser. So now that is all set, we can hit confirm like that, and our backend query is all nicely set up. Okay, so we're not done yet. You can see I've got a little error up the top here. Now this is quite important because we're using an API call here, and of course it's talking about our infinite scroll here must generate children from a variable. Well, what does that kind of mean? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to create a data type which is going to kind of represent the shape of the data that we're going to display within inside our contacts list view, because of course we're using API calls here. We're not using kind of more native sort of Supabase integration within inside FlutterFlow. So we know we kind of got a contacts sort of table in my database. It's got an ID, it's got a name, it's got a department. So I'm going to create a custom data type, and what we're going to do is when we make that API call out to Supabase, that when the data comes back, we're going to kind of use the power of FlutterFlow to map those values to this particular data type. type, which consequently we're going to then display within inside this contact list view. It's very straightforward to set up. It sounds more complex than it is if you haven't done it yet. Let's move over to then this option here called data types. Let's add a brand new data type up here. Let's call this contact like that. Hit create. Now I'm going to add some field in. So I know that my contact has an ID. Now this is just going to be an integer like that. Hit create. I know that it has a name. So this is just going to be a type string. Hit create. And finally, I know that it has a department like that. And that's going to be a string like that. So of course you would create a data type that's going to kind of map directly onto your database, your Supabase database table. Okay, so let's just hit create. So they're all now set up. What I can now do is I can now move over to our API calls. I can move over to response and test. And this is where the magic kind of happens. So it says pass as data type. Just select that. And I'm going to select this. I'm going to say contact. And it's going to be a list. So API call takes place. The response is then going to be mapped to a list of type contact from our data type. And then that's then going to be available within inside our sort of database query. It's certainly going to represent each child that we have back into the variable. So with all of that set, just hit save. That's all done. Let's move back over here to the widget tree. And it means I can now go up to the children here. Now I've got my contact. I'm just going to, if you haven't got contact there, just type in contact itself there. Let's set the value up. Now this is going to be our contacts list response, and it's going to say as data type. I don't need to change this at all. It's going to keep it as that and hit confirm like that and hit save. Message is going to pop up, hit OK, and you can now see I've got that ghosted look with inside this particular list view. So this represents that this is dynamic, and of course every contact in here is going to represent every single row. So now we've got that in place, we're really almost at the end now, funny enough, and we just now need to make our UI kind of display the data. So where it's got the name text, just hit up the text here. In my case, I'm going to choose my contact item. Available options, it's going to be data structure field. Select the field, it's going to be the name like that. I'm just going to put here for the UI perspective, just so it says name like that. Hit confirm, you can see the name is there. And here, department, I'm just going to select this, go to then the contact item, choose then the data structure field, select this now to be department, and I'm just going to put department in here just purely for a UI, hit confirm, and that is all set up for us. So I think we are pretty well much in place here, where I think that if we were to now kind of fire this up in test mode, and certainly in the local run mode, which is what I'm going to do now, let's see if this now works. And of course, if we made any errors, we'll come back and we'll correct them. Okay, so here we are then in local run. It's fired up inside the simulator. You can see that I've got records that is landed within inside my container, within inside my list view. So if I now just start sort of scrolling up here, you can see now that I'm just getting a continuous kind of stream of records kind of coming in. There's kind of no kind of loading indicators or anything like that going on within inside a mobile application, but we'll flick over to the web browser now, and I'll kind of show you the network traffic that's happening behind the scenes, just to prove that we have got this infinite scrolling feature enabled within inside our application. Okay, so here I am then in Google Chrome. I've got the developer tools kind of loaded at the bottom of the display. Of course, if you're on Windows, just press F12 or its function F12 if you are on Mac. And this is what I'm presented with here. I've got no network traffic visible here, but if I now just kind of start scrolling, you'll see I've got the regular kind of traffic. You can see now that I'm starting to get these kind of requests going in as I'm kind of continually loading records. You see my scroll bar here that's kind of sort of moving up in its kind of position. You can see those kind of network requests that are kind of happening behind the scenes. Now, of course, what will happen is I'll keep scrolling. I'll get to the end of my record set, which is 100 in my case. And then, of course, there'll be nothing more to then display within inside the UI. You can see here now that my contacts is empty here, the array. My last one that's come back is the final 10 that I've got in my list. So we can clearly see here that we've kind of got the infinite scrolling feature enabled within inside our application. Let's pop back over to FlutterFlow, and there's a couple other little bits that I just want to mention about. So just a couple of little extra bits to make you aware of, and we'll also talk a little bit about the quirk in a second that I was referencing earlier back in the video. Now, when we enabled the infinite scrolling, we also enabled pull to refresh. So what does that kind of enable us to do? Well, if I move back over to the widget tree here and look at the list view, and if I move up to the actions, inside the action flow editor, if I just open that up, you'll see here that one of the action kind of events that we've got at the top there is on pull to refresh. Now, all this is simply doing is that when I kind of scroll down from the top, when we're at the very top of the list view, we get a little refresh indicator, and what that is simply going to do is just refresh the kind of the list, the contacts list view that we got there. It's going to make that API call, and it's going to set ourselves back to kind of where we were right at the very beginning. So just wanted to point that out to you, because you might be wondering, okay, well, what does that mean to our application? Well, if I just quickly pop over to then the test mode here, if I kind of just pull this down here, you'll see now that my UI will kind of get refreshed here. Of course, I can't pull to refresh, of course, until I'm right at the top here. But at least it's a nice way that we can simply put that functionality inside our application if that is something you would like to do. Now, the other thing to point out as well, if you just look very carefully at this, when I do the refresh, you'll see that we're going to get this little loading indicator that's going to kind of just sort of flicker behind. You can just see it in the middle. Now, that's kind of been introduced because that is configured within inside FlutterFlow itself. Now, we can kind of find a little quick way of kind of turning that off. If you didn't want to have this kind of loading indicator that sits behind, one little tip that you can have is create and like a blank component, and that blank component is really just got like this container that kind of has nothing in it at all. It could be a height of 100 but infinite, but it's got no background or fill color or anything like that. Then all you need to do then with inside the actual list view itself, if I got to the backend query and look at the backend query loading widget, what I can now do is I can set this to now be a component, and I can now select the component, and I can then just choose the blank component like that. Now, that will mean that if I just do a quick refresh in my application here, we'll just quickly pop over once that's done, and you should not then notice that little sort of refresh indicator. If I've just done a refresh, if I just quickly do this, you can now see that it's disappeared as well. It's just a little quick, kind of like a bit of a hack really in some respect, to kind of remove any kind of refresh kind of indicator. You'll notice also as well that when you're looking inside the web browser and looking Google, the actual loading indicator will be much more prominent with inside the web browser than it actually is with inside the UI of your mobile application. Okay, just a couple of other bits to point out. Let's pop back over to FlutterFlow. So one thing I spotted with this particular implementation is that there's something kind of going on behind the scenes which I can't kind of find a solution for. So of course, if anybody within inside the community kind of discovers kind of what the solution to this is, then please do add it into the comments. But you can see that what I've done is I've done an instant reload on my application here within inside the web browser, and in the developer tools here, which I've just filtered down on the term contacts here, so I can just see only those results that come back. You can see here that on my very first load of the application, you can see I'm getting two sets of kind of the contacts come back. So we're basically getting 20 records back on the initial request. Now, of course, what that means is that we've got 20 here, and you can see now that I'm now starting to scroll down. I'm now starting to see those kind of those additional kind of requests that are going on. So it's just that at the beginning that I can't seem to find a way to prevent these multiple requests going on at the beginning. Now, it's going to be no big deal, I'm sure, in most use cases, but I just wanted to point that out just so then it saves you kind of maybe scratching your head thinking, okay, why am I seeing that? But perhaps Steve is not seeing it. So I just wanted to mention that. So just something for you to be aware of. Okay, so there we go then. Hopefully you enjoyed this particular video. It's been great trying to get this kind of infinite sort of scrolling working. As you can see, it's not particularly complex. It's quite straightforward to implement once you know what you are doing. If you enjoyed these videos and you are watching on YouTube, please continue to be a subscriber. And of course, do like the video as well. If you are interested in being part of the or larger community, the Digital Pros No Code Academy, it'll be great to see you there as well. The link is in the description, and there's more of my content there, including these type of videos and of course additional ones as well, and of course all of my written material is there as well. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. I'll catch up with you soon.